What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Assassin's Creed Mirage, following its 1.1 update, which brought some new content. But before we dive into all that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform. And while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a link below to a video covering everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked below as well. Now, as strange as it might sound, I do also need to inform you that I have in fact received a review key for this game, and considering that I am taking a look at it in 2026 when it initially released in 2023, that may be of note, but this is because the game itself released a 1.1 update known as the Valley of Memory for free last year in November, and around that time actually Ubisoft reached out and asked if I wanted to take a look at the game, and that is where I got the game from, as I was already planning on taking a look at some of the other games. Which brings me to my next point. Overall, I would say Assassin's Creed Mirage is not like a mind-blowing game or anything. However, it was much more in line with what I expected from the series after having only previously played the first two games and then not touching another one until Assassin's Creed Shadows. I got what is probably best described as culture shock with Shadows, given just like everything going on with the series in between, and Mirage seemed like an easier place to start after looking into things because of its approach to trying to take the series back to its simpler roots with stuff like, 1 and 2 for instance, but also it's quite a bit shorter than a lot of the larger, more RPG-focused titles in the series. Which is interesting then, because on the gameplay side of things, this is again much more what I expected in terms of, Assassin's Creed, stealth assassins, all that stuff. However, I will say that the story wasn't exactly doing anything for me, and there was some mechanical stuff hanging around, like the way your character moves and getting stuck on terrain and things like that could be annoying over time. Now, with that said, let's actually dive fully into the rest of this stuff, starting with the technical state. How is this game running all the way in 2026? So, for the most part, it is okay. I did have a couple of crashes across my little less than 40 hours with the game. Not unplayable by any means, but again, just a couple of crashes here and there. I also wanted to take this moment to talk a little bit about the movement of this game. It's kind of on the clunky side, I guess would be the way to put it, in the sense that a lot of times you'll be trying to parkour around, and for whatever reason you get stuck on something or you move the wrong direction. Sometimes you'll be walking down the street and your character decides they want to enter parkour mode on a tiny little ledge, and you get stuck on stuff. There's also the fact that every animal in this game seems to have full-on collision, including stuff like chickens and cats, and sometimes this is really annoying when they block something like a doorway as an example, which can certainly be frustrating. Next up, however, we've got New Game Plus and Difficulty. So when you go to start a new game, you'll be given a choice between skipping to Valley of Memory or starting from the beginning. So if you're just looking to check out the new content and you don't have your saves or something for whatever reason, you can just jump straight into the new content. And once you finish the game once, you unlock things like New Game Plus mode as an example, which will let you carry forth your progression and play again as usual. But for difficulty, we've got Apprentice Assassin, Hardened Assassin, Master Assassin, and Ultimate Assassin. Some of those were added with the 1.1 update in an attempt to make the game a little more difficult. I played on Assassin to begin with, which is normal, and that is extremely easy because your character is very, very overpowered. But unsurprisingly, as you can see on screen here, as you move up in difficulty, it affects things like enemy health, defense, damage, detection time, how hard it is to pickpocket, stuff like that. And then in addition to this stuff, you can also choose to turn on permadeath, which is effectively like an Iron Man mode, and you can, if you prefer, just choose a custom difficulty and try to feel out what feels good to you. So at the very least, you have a few options, but honestly, it's just not a terribly difficult game, especially once you get your hands on the more overpowered stuff. But keeping it moving, let's next up talk about the story setup and my thoughts on it. We are not going full spoilers here, but truth be told, it's just not a very long game and there's not a ton of story in there anyway, which is one of the reasons I think the story does fall a bit flat, however. What is really fun, on the other hand, is actually the setting. So this game takes place in 9th century Baghdad, following a character known as Basim. So from what I understand, our main character here is in fact a returning character from Valhalla. However, this is sort of an origin story for that character, and they're involved in some events in that game that I am aware of, but don't really want to get into here, but it does color the ending of this game quite a bit. Before all of that happens, however, we first have to actually get there because our MC here actually acts as a bit of a street urchin growing up, doing petty jobs, and ultimately tries to get into the good graces of what are at this point called the Hidden Ones, which are clearly the assassins. And after finding out that they are planning on stealing a chest from the local palace, you obviously attempt to steal it for them to join them, but that goes wrong pretty quickly, resulting in the death of an important leader. However, this artifact that you touch in the process of all of this shows you a vision of some other time and place. You're not exactly sure in the moment, but obviously you want to find out, and that's going to require you tracking down the Order of the Ancients, the people who were going to pick this item up from the palace here. When this all goes sideways, you are found and then pulled into the Hidden Ones and trained as an assassin, which kicks off the story, and then our main goal is basically to track down members of the Order of the Ancients in order to, again, try to figure out more about what is going on here. And that forms the bulk of the game, really. You just track down those individual targets, and then most of the interesting stuff all happens at the end of the game, which probably isn't too surprising given its nature as an origin story, but it really does feel like the moment something interesting happens, the game is done. But as something that is on the shorter side, the main story itself might take you 20-ish hours, give or take, whereas 100%ing the game is like probably a 40-ish hour endeavor. Now, while the actual individual story beats were kind of whatever until the end, I will say a couple of things. I really liked Basim as a character. Our MC here is a really cool guy to actually play as, and watching him dealing with his conflicts along the journey was pretty interesting to me, but it wasn't just enough to save kind of the rest of it. On top of that, though, I will say that the missions in which you are setting things up to actually assassinate your targets were pretty fun. Like, there's one that takes place during an auction, another one is meant to take place during like a scholarly lecture, and you have to figure out just kind of how to navigate those and get to the target and then actually assassinate them. And I had a decent amount of fun with that, but all told, the story itself was a bit on the disappointing side, which then brings us to the progression side of things. So this game is not nearly as progression heavy as a lot of the other games in the series, from what I understand, and having played AC Shadows, it had a lot more progression than this as well, whereas things are relatively simple here. We've got some basic equipment such as our actual outfit, as well as our sword and dagger, our tools that we can use, things like smoke bombs, throwing knives, that kind of stuff. Our skill tree, which will make us just better at certain things, enhance them obviously, as skill trees tend to do, and then you can upgrade things like your outfit, your weapons, and your tools even as you go. And that's pretty much it. So every outfit you earn can give you a buff that is associated with that outfit. And then as you gather resources and schematics, you can upgrade those to increase that effect. Same goes with your weapons. Tools take a little bit longer to unlock, but the premise is the same. You unlock tools by increasing your skills once you get the initial one. You can then put your skill points into one of the trees to unlock more tools, and then upgrade those accordingly once you have them unlocked. Now, I will say smoke bombs in particular wound up being just absolutely crazy. Like, those things are busted. Like, there are very few challenges and like sequence things you have to do that we'll get to in a moment in order to get the 100% that the smoke bombs do not just absolutely trivialize. But thanks to their upgrades and the skill tree upgrades as well, you can potentially make these tools much, much better, which is one of the things that makes the smoke bomb so good as an example. And I can see why they didn't just give you all the tools straight away and they tied some of that to progression, because some of that stuff is just way overpowered, which is one of the things that contributes to combat being just like incredibly easy, even if you're not sneaking, which I think is probably one of the reasons they added those difficulties in. That said though, let's talk a little bit about the gameplay and world of this one. Unsurprisingly, the game is in fact an open world adventure, and it has a lot of the hallmarks of a Ubisoft open world. There are effectively towers or viewpoints that you'll scamper your way up and then use them to scout out things in the given area that you happen to be in. And while this will not mark everything on your map, it will mark the most important stuff usually. while also revealing the map and allowing you to, of course, track all that stuff down, typically in the form of things like collectibles and stuff. Outside of just exploring, you're basically going to be doing missions and contracts. The missions are pretty much your main story stuff, and then the contracts are effectively little side jobs you can take on, which allow you to flex some of your stealth and assassination skills, if you will. And the cool thing is all of these are replayable via the added Animus sequences. These just allow you to replay missions and contracts while also choosing to take on optional objectives. And if you complete them with those objectives, every objective you complete adds points towards your total on a reward track that you can then just get a bunch of rewards from, including one of the cooler looking outfits. I actually wound up having a lot of fun doing these, more so than I expected, and again, the smoke bomb being upgraded just trivializes so many of these, but I really did have a lot of fun with them. With that in mind, each individual area of Baghdad has a bureau or like a home base that you'll be operating out of, which is where you'll do things like pick up these contracts. But speaking of Baghdad, probably what was a little bit of a surprise to me actually is how fun and really gorgeous the city of Baghdad was. It was really fun to just run around this city, and while it's not like a particularly in-depth or immersive place to run around, they did add just enough mechanics to keep it interesting, and there's enough hidden stuff and rewards and things to find laying around that exploration actually does feel rewarding for how long this game is. I think if it had been longer, it probably wouldn't have worked, but for what this game is, it was a lot of fun. I also really enjoyed how the city was laid out, how the parkour things were set up, and you could clearly see like multiple paths you could move through an individual area, and then that's before you start interacting with the environment, like ripping scaffolds down, stuff like that. Which is what makes things like the collision boxes on like things like animals, as an example, be especially annoying at times, because it's like the one part of it that actually feels clunky, and it really gets in the way of an otherwise really fun place to explore. Now, outside of just more traditional stealth, basically hiding and of course stabbing things from hiding spots, things like that, you can also engage in a few other mechanics that keep this interesting, notably the tokens. So tokens that you'll typically earn by doing like contracts or pickpocketing people, as you were a thief at one point, so pickpocketing is a valid way to get most things you need. But these tokens can be spent on the merchants, scholars, or the mercenaries, and you can use them as ways to blend in, like paying off merchants with a token will typically send them walking through a path that you can then follow them in, and as long as you're keeping pace with a large group, you blend in and nobody notices you. Whereas you can pay mercenaries to just run in and attack the guards for you if you want, and create a distraction for you to slip by. You could spend a scholar token on a musician and have them distract guards that way, and there's just a lot of little things like that that do make it more fun to explore and find different ways through a general problem. Now, given how very busy the city itself is, one of the ways that you can navigate some of that is the eagle vision. This is both literal like eagle vision from the previous ones where things light up and you can see stuff outlined. Also, you can switch to the view of an eagle that will then look down and help you navigate and find quest objectives and mark them for you, that kind of thing, via your eagle Enkidu. Now, Enkidu, it's important to understand, is not actually considered eagle vision for the challenges, by the way. Just thought that was a little bit funny. However, a couple other things I wanted to mention are the Tales of Baghdad. I guess these are as close as you could get to something like a side quest. These are just like little quick adventures that typically offer some insight into things going on around the city, but they are very short and there are not a lot of them. Otherwise, you're just going to be collecting things like the books or the shards off of order members you can find pacing around the streets. Turning in lost books that you find can get you extra skill points, and then once you collect all the shards, you can take them to a place in the wilderness and get some extra outfits, that kind of thing. And it's all very, I would say, run-of-the-mill if you've ever played any open world game, really, but it's just interesting enough that I think it serves this game and what it's trying to do well enough for what it is, even if it's not like amazing or anything. Last but not least, before we move on, as with every game that lets you murder indiscriminately, you do have to watch out for the repercussion system, here known as notoriety. Basically, if people see you committing crimes, your notoriety goes high, and the higher it gets, hits, the more the world will react to it. This can see people just immediately recognizing you and attacking you outright with you not actually having done anything, or at the highest level it might send an elite guard after you. You can reduce this by killing that elite guard or tearing down posters that they'll put up of you. And again, pretty basic system, but I think it works just well enough for what this game is. Which then brings us to combat and stealth. So the combat side of things is very simple, but you are extraordinarily overpowered. Basically, enemies come in a variety of different types, but mainly little melee guys, spear guys, or the bigger, heavier armored characters. You are able to parry and dodge. Little guys can be parried. This will break their defense, at which point you can instant kill them. The large characters, however, can only be hit with damage from the back, and they are much more difficult to parry. They're very easy to dodge against. One of the skill trees at the very bottom of it will allow you to dodge into an unparryable attack, which will cause you to flip over them and put you in perfect position to hit their back, which makes even those enemies pretty trivial. Each enemy has a defense stat though. This is the top bar, and you'll need to break that in order to one-hit kill them, though sometimes it's not even necessary. Ideally though, if you're in stealth, things won't ever actually get that far and you can easily just assassinate targets outright. But because of how simple the basic combat is, on top of just being able to instantly assassinate most characters, combat is never really much of a challenge unless you are, on higher difficulties and you are vastly outnumbered. The crazy part though is this is where your tools come in, because while again you could be in outright combat, yes, even then you can use your tools. Things like smoke bombs, for instance, will of course put a smoke bomb down, and then the enemies around you will actually immediately be opened up to an assassinate attack, which will actually just let you chain kill a bunch of them immediately. Throwing knives, if thrown into a character's head, will one-shot them. There are also distractions you can throw out. There's a blow dart that will put characters to sleep, potentially indefinitely. And so for all of those reasons, both in outright combat and certainly in stealth, it's your world and these characters are only briefly living in it. Stealth is pretty simple as well. Just stay out of the sight of enemies and use your environment to hide and distract them. You can whistle to call them over to a hiding spot and potentially assassinate them that way. That's a really good way to break up enemy formations before you get the smoke bombs, at which point you can just throw that and then run up and stab them all. Combine that with eagle vision so you can accurately scope out where all of these individual characters are, and you're pretty much good to go. Now, the challenges for things like the animus sequences are usually all about not doing a lot of that stuff. That is to say, not getting detected at all, not using your eagle vision, not taking any damage, that kind of thing. And even then, if you're utilizing the tools, it really shouldn't be that hard. Now, my only complaint, I guess, if you could call it that, is I think that in outright combat, our character is a little too strong. We are an absolute murder machine from stealth, especially once you get all your tools, and it feels like the obvious weakness here would have been to make you squishier in melee combat, but even then, it's pretty easy to dominate that as well, which makes for a game where it feels like you're playing a character that doesn't really have any weaknesses. And in the sense that this is a game that I don't think is trying to be punishingly difficult or anything, I think that's perfectly okay. It just does feel a little ridiculous to, be able to easily take out like 20 plus characters fighting you all at the same time in some instances. Either way, however, the stealth gameplay was fun. I felt like an assassin, which is, believe it or not, something that seems kind of the point of a game called Assassin's Creed, though it's my understanding that a few of the games like, say, Valhalla or Odyssey don't really have you feeling like an assassin, though I guess I'll judge those when I get there. But either way, I enjoyed it. Now that does bring us to the Valley of Memory, the recent update. So I've mentioned a few things that the Valley of Memory added here and there, but the real big thing is of course the new content. So once you get pretty close to the end of the story, you'll unlock the ability to travel to the Valley of Memory, the new area, that sees you tracking down information about your lost father. Now for the most part, all of this functions exactly the same way as the base game does. It just simply gives you a bit more story to explore, while also introducing a few new collectibles for you to go and find. But by and large, if you like the base game, you'll probably like this content edition because, again, it is exactly what the base game is doing, just more of it. It's also free though, so, certainly nothing to complain about, I suppose. That brings us to our Steam Deck section. Officially speaking, Assassin's Creed has a playable rating on the Steam Deck, and generally I would agree with that. It's definitely a system you could play this game on, though I will say that Steam seems to have dinged it for small text on the screen, which isn't something I personally had much of an issue with, though I suppose it's not exactly wrong. But outside of some odd-looking textures here and there, as long as you try to keep the frame rate around 30, it seems to be able to handle it well enough. With the issue that I ran into is if you do anything to try to take it above that, it seems like it stutters a fair bit in a way that is really annoying for a game like this. However, otherwise, it does seem perfectly playable there. I didn't really have much to complain about, so you should be able to play it there if that's what you want. But that does bring us to our positives, negatives, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So, on the positive side of things, for me, I've got to say exploration, the setting, the city of Baghdad were all really cool places to get into and explore. I think while nothing mind-blowing or anything, it just really suits the gameplay experience that they were actually trying to give people here, and surprising even me, it wound up being one of my favorite parts of this experience. On top of that, it must be said that I honestly kind of enjoyed the tighter focus here. This game seems to know exactly what it's trying to do, and it doesn't really get carried away with a bunch of side stuff. And for this sort of stealth action-oriented game, I think that makes a lot of sense in a way that gameplay-wise was a lot of fun. However, we do have those negatives, and one of those being that while the game does have that tighter focus, the story that it's telling you as part of that is just honestly kind of meh. All of the interesting stuff happens at the end, and while Basim is an interesting character, nobody else surrounding him really is, so it was hard to get invested in much of anyone. On top of that, the clunky movement, especially the weird collision stuff with like every animal in the game. The fact that it constantly feels like you're transitioning into parkour when you were just like walking down the street, which means you get stuck on a bunch of stuff all the time. Sometimes you go to jump off of something and it takes you in like a completely weird direction. And there's just a lot of stuff about the movement, especially that feels clunky in a way that a game like this really shouldn't feel clunky in. But that does bring us to our conclusion. So, Assassin's Creed Mirage is, to this day, $50 US as a base game. It's my understanding that that is what the game launched at as well. And I can see what they were going for there, with it being a shorter experience overall. But I've got to say that while I enjoyed a good chunk of it, this is just not a game that is doing anything like super interesting, in the sense that it's a pretty by-the-books, open-world sort of action-adventure title. And overall, I would say it's good, but it's not exactly going to blow your mind or anything, and to that end, personally, my maximum for this would have been like $40 US if I had paid for it. But luckily for everyone, I suppose, if this is something you are actually wanting to play, this game is on sale all the time, so you could get it for even less than that if you really wanted to. And so, to my mind, I would say that Assassin's Creed Mirage is definitely more in line with what I was expecting from the Assassin's Creed series when I jumped into something like Shadows as an example. And to say it a little more succinctly, I think I would describe this one as good, but not great, which I think is where I'm going to leave off this particular review. So, certainly hope you enjoyed all that. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.